Hello, welcome back to the Maximus Ironthumper fitness seminar. This is part 2, running. Before me is pretty much all the stuff that I bought over my 11-month period of intensive training that took me from being a complete non-runner up to a long distance runner. But don't worry, if you want to get into running, most of this stuff is pretty much superfluous. So I've always thought if you know the questions, especially nowadays with the internet, you can generally find the answers. But if you don't know the questions, then life is difficult. And that's how it was for me when I started running. I just didn't know anything. I didn't know what I didn't know even. So that's what this video is really for, is to give anybody who's interested in running a bit of a head start in finding things out for themselves. I'm going to talk about basic kit and then basic technique, which I think a lot of people get wrong, and then I'm going to go on to extra kit that you can get, things that will optimize your training and make life easier, and then I'll finish up with all the advanced tips that I found useful in the latter stages of my training. I can illustrate that change in technique in my own case with these are what I started out running in. And yes, they're walking boots. We'll get into that too. On the soles of these, you can see very uneven wear, particularly there in that corner. Whereas these are the running shoes that I ran in the most, and I put a lot of miles on these, hundreds of miles on these shoes. You can see there that the wear is completely even, and so that's down to an improvement in technique. But as I say, we'll get into all of that. First up then, basic kit. And as you can see, the most important thing is what you put on your feet. Despite what it looks like here, you might be surprised to learn that prior to taking up running a couple of years ago, I had never owned a pair of trainers in my whole adult life. I always just wore boots. And with that in mind, when I started running, and all the other times in the past that I'd taken up running briefly before I'd, given up quite soon afterwards, I'd always run in boots. These are walking boots, and it turns out they're called walking boots for a reason. They're not for running. So I was under the completely foolish impression that running in boots is what tough guys did. It turns out even the army don't run in boots anymore. They train in trainers, and they only put the boots on when it comes to the actual exercises. There's reasons for that. So boots are, well, for one, they're really heavy, and these ones are. Then they're not tending to be very mobile in the sole. They give you a lot of support in your ankle because that's what you need when you're walking over rough terrain. But if you're running, that lack of ankle mobility translates to more stress going up to your knees and then up to higher up joints. So it's all round a bad idea to run in walking boots. So to illustrate my utter naivety when I started out running, what I would call seriously, one run in particular, I vividly remember that I set off to try and I plotted out a route, and I'd done it on a paper map. So I took a paper map with me, and yes, we'll get into alternatives for that as well. I was wearing joggers, not unlike these joggers, simply because they were called joggers. I was going jogging, so I thought I should wear some joggers. These are not my running clothes, these are my talking about running clothes. But these are nice and comfortable, and they're kind of like fleecy. I have no idea why they're called joggers, because and just before I set off, it started raining, so I put a coat on. Not long into that, it was just getting worse. The rain was coming in. Of course, the fleecy trousers that I was wearing just got sodden and really heavy. My feet started to hurt in the walking boots. It was just miserable. It turned out, I don't think I did that much running. I'm not even sure if I got all the way around. I don't remember, but I vividly remember part way along walking along a main road. Obviously I hadn't plotted the route very well on my map. Just feeling utterly miserable. Just sodden wet, heavy wet clothes. Oh, it was, yeah, grim. So, following that, I then retired my walking boots. I then went on eBay and I bought these. So these are a pair of trainers. These are military spec trainers. And I thought, well, they'll do the job. Now the thing is with military kit, it's either brilliant or it's terrible. So it's brilliant if it needs to last forever and be really heavy duty. But if it's stuff that they just issue to the squaddies, it can err on the terrible side. So things like the trainers, they will draw up a specification, put it out to tender, and it goes to the cheapest person. And this was a cancelled order, it said on the eBay thing. And I got them, like I say, my first pair of trainers as an adult, and I tried these on. They fitted perfectly because these were 11 wide. So this guy had a huge job lot of 11 wide trainers. They fitted really well. They felt super comfortable compared to walking boots. And I thought, brilliant, I'm away. I liked them so much, I ordered another pair immediately. Now this turned out to be a terrible idea. It wasn't quite as terrible as walking boots. Turns out when you run, after a couple of miles, your feet will get bigger. And if your shoes fitted perfectly when you started out, they're going to be pinching horribly after a few miles. So these are 11 wide. All the other shoes are 12. So for me, I had to go up half a size to make them fit properly during the run. But trainers are not what you run in. You run in running shoes, and that's what these ones are. I have a huge difference between trainers and actual running shoes is the soles. So I had always assumed that trainers had, or running shoes, all the bump that they tell you about them was just gimmicky sales nonsense. And I mean, a lot of it probably is, but these ones in particular, so these are, all these trainers, all these running shoes rather, are Brooks, and I just got into Brooks kit just because I happened to buy a pair of shorts and I really liked them. They were really nicely made, and I thought, well, I'll try that for the running shoes. So subsequently, I then found these again on eBay. Now it looks like I've spent a lot of money on this kit, but generally I haven't, because one thing I found out is that they release new editions of running shoes each year, which means you can buy brand new the previous year's edition really cheap. So there's places that they tend to be on eBay. There's also a great website that I found which gives you comparisons between different running shoes, and it will also give you the current availability of stock, whether it be on eBay or on Amazon or sportshoes.com or various other suppliers, and I'll put that link in the description. It's a really useful resource actually, especially for comparing different shoes and seeing what they're like, because I went through quite a few until I found shoes that I felt like really suited me and the type of terrain that I was running on. So these were the first ones that I got, and these were only 20 something pounds, not much at all for what they are. Like I say, massively discounted because these were a year or even 2 years out of date, as it were. So one of the things I didn't know at all about running shoes was about the drop, and the drop is the difference between this measurement here, so it's kind of hard to show you because it's the inside, so where the heel of your foot goes, and the ground is a certain measurement there, and then it's a certain measurement here between the ball of your foot and the ground. And the difference between those two is called the drop. These are what you'd probably think of as traditional, a traditional sort of running shoe, in that that's a 12mm drop there. In contrast, these were the next running shoes that I got, and this is a 4mm drop from here to here. That makes a surprising amount of difference. I'll get into all that in a bit, we'll get to that. But back to these ones for a minute. In here, inside the sole of the shoe, there's a midsole which is made of some fancy non-Newtonian fluid. And by non-Newtonian, it's kind of like if you've ever tried this thing with corn flour, where you can fill up a tub of corn flour and water and put your hand through it, but if you punch it, it resists. And so what that means is, in practice with all of these running shoes, is that it gives a different response if you land hard to when you land soft. It's quite amazingly effective. So all that technology, it's not just flim flam, or not always anyway. Some of it's actually really useful too. And another thing I found is that these are actual running shoes are featherweight compared to these trainers. I'll briefly go over the other running shoes as well and their various merits, and then we'll get on to the two pairs that I really settled with in the end. Something else I'll just point out quickly. I've laced these in a strange way. Now that's this kind of lacing. Each pair of shoes here has got a different lacing on it. This particular one means that it doesn't clamp around this bit, and when I was wearing these shoes, that's what's happening. So the middle of my foot was being pinched somewhat. So that lacing there alleviates that. And I'll put a link in the description to a website that is just about shoelacing styles. It sounds horrific, but it's actually quite interesting. There's a lot of ways to lace up your shoes. So this was a big leap forward, but when I was reading more about running shoes, I wanted to try the low drop, like I say. So this is a 12mm drop, and I thought my running style, the way I run, I was still tending to heel strike a bit, as we'll get into this in the technique section. But heel striking is where you land like that, well, with your heel obviously, and of course that's going to be exacerbated a bit if you've got more heel there than you perhaps need. So I got hold of these next. These are trail shoes. So you can see, in comparison to the road ones here, the trail shoes are almost like football boots. Not that I've seen a pair of football boots since I was that big. But they're studded. They're studded to the extent at which they're pretty hopeless on wet tarmac, but they're great in snow and mud. And I've actually been out running. I did quite a long run in the snow in these, and they were great for it. One of the main differences between road running shoes and trail running shoes is the way it grips the side of your feet. So with these ones and with these ones, if I'm on say running across the side of a hill, a side slope, running along a path, my feet will tend to slip down the hill. But in the trail shoes, my feet are gripped and they don't have any side movement. So you feel much more secure. Well, you are much more secure. So these trail shoes were brilliant for off-road use, and I ran my first half marathon in these, and my feet were hurting pretty badly by the end of it. So for me, they didn't work long distance. There's not enough cushioning in them. Now, I've been reading a lot about the type of shoes that people were wearing for marathon running, and in the Brooks range, the next one up, well, there was a trail shoe that people use for long distances, were the Cascadias. So that's what these are. And this is what I actually ran the marathon in these. And these were pretty good actually for that. So the big difference between these trail shoes and these trail shoes is the cushioning. These are a slightly higher drop, but the main thing is the amount of material that's in here to absorb the impact as you run along. There's obviously a trade-off, because the more cushiony, the nicer it is as you're pounding along. That's lost energy in a sense, so there's always a balance to be struck. So if I was running, say, a 10k off-road, I'd have these because I'd be zooming along. But as you go further and further, or if you're on the road, you need something different. So I found then I picked up these ones, and again, just because they were really cheap, I think, yeah, most of these came in about £20, or I think these ones were 25, so all hugely discounted from their original price. And I got these ones just to see what they were like, and if I'm going out for a quick 4 or 5 miles, these are brilliant. So these are the lightest of the bunch. They really weigh almost nothing. These are a low drop as well, so for me, for my running style and my type of running gait, they work a treat. But there's not much. They're hopeless off-road. I wouldn't run across a wet field in them. You'd just be sliding about. But I do really like them because I can put these on and go blast out for like 4 or 5 miles and just feel really nimble and fast, which is not something I tend to feel on an everyday basis. So really like those ones. And then these ones I got last year, and these are this is the most I've paid for any running shoes so far. These I think I paid £60 for, and again a huge discount from what they would have been. And again, it's because these were last season's models, I suppose. And these are Calderas, and these are trail shoes as well, but they're not that aggressive on there, so they're fine for road running. And these are my current all-round running shoe. They grip my foot as well as these ones do, but they've got much more cushioning in them. And if I'm not running a race, if I don't need ultimate speed, then that's really comfortable. Yes, these did really well, and I got through the marathon with them, but they're just sort of outclassed by these ones to me. And again, that's just for Brooks shoes. I don't know anything about any other brands. One of the reasons I stuck with Brooks is because they only do running shoes, and I did find that the range of shoes that most of the other brands do just was a bit overwhelming, to be honest. But I figured this brand were nice quality, and I could get my head around all their offerings, so that's kind of what I stuck with. So upshot then, in conclusion for footwear, as soon as I'd actually tried proper running shoes, I never went running in these again. Ever. So apart from there's a big quality difference between the two, but also trainers differ to running shoes in that they have lots of internal seams and things like that, kind of all kinds of subtle stuff that makes no difference at all if you're just doing a mile or two, but things that really add up after a bit. So after 3 miles in these, not only had my feet grown, so they were pushing against the edge there, but also I could feel all the internal construction of these, all the seams inside pressing against various bits of my foot, and it just becomes more and more uncomfortable as you go. Whereas none of the running shoes were like that at all. Staying with feet for a moment, I'll talk briefly about socks. Now, I kept thinking that I would need there's definitely a need for running shoes. I thought there'd probably be a need for running socks. And these particular ones are rubbish, and they offer no real benefit over normal socks. These socks are quite different, and they're to stop blisters. So they're basically 2 socks. There's just 2 socks stitched together. That's really what they are, and they're called 1,000 milers or something like that. So the idea of these is they don't give you blisters. So having tried quite a few different running socks, what I do now is, and this is what I found the best for running for me, is I wear these, which are sold as thermal work socks. I think they're cool, and you can get them in places like Screwfix. And they're just tough socks. All the actual proper running socks that I've tried just tend to disintegrate on me after a few miles, but these are held up really well. Yes, they're much cheaper and more comfortable than proper running socks. So there we go. We'll move up again then and onto shorts. So these shorts are what are called 2-in-1 shorts. A loose pair of shorts for the outside, and then On the inside, you got these compression shorts. These shorts are what I ran the marathon in, and well, just about all my long runs actually. And yeah, they work really well. So, strange enough though, the idea of these, I've read different accounts for this, but a lot of people say that you're not supposed to wear any underwear with these, that the compression shorts, the inner part here, does the job. Well, that wasn't the case for me, I can tell you. So for me, I then found, and one of the really useful places I found for running advice was to look on Reddit, on the subreddit for running, and you can just search through there. And I came across somebody there suggested Under Armour boxer jocks, and so I got a couple of pairs of those, and they are supportive, and that's what I found that's what I needed for running, because yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you just don't want things jangling around. So for me it was the Under Armour boxer jocks with these 2-in-1 shorts, and that was an excellent combination. Moving on up then, and when it comes to tops, so it all depends, and by the way, I would run in those shorts whatever the weather. That's something I discovered, well, in that horrible 7-miler that I did, that yes, for me, well, obviously jogging bottoms are a complete no-no because they're so heavy and hot, and yes, they're comfortable when you're not jogging, otherwise forget it. But for me, I wore the 2-in-1 shorts even when it was snowing, and I was perfectly comfortable with that. What did change is what I wear on top. So I've got, this was one of the first ones that I picked up, and again I got this really cheap, and I think probably because it's such horrific colours, but on the upside you're not going to get run over, or if you do get run over, they've really got no excuse. They definitely saw you. So this is a running top made by Brooks, like like all the running shoes there, and what's really good about these is it reduces the wind chill on your arms, which for me that's the sort of thing in winter time that I found affected me more. On my legs, for some reason, it didn't bother me at all. And I would wear this for winter, spring, quite a lot of time, not for summer. So for summertime, I then got hold of, and these are made by Under Armour. I got two here which are almost the same, and this is like a vest top. The only difference between the two is that one is a compression version and the other is a loose fit. So the compression clothing, it's supposed to increase your circulation, that's the idea of it. I'm not convinced that's the case, but what I did find was that in really hot weather, I found that wearing a compression top was actually really helpful, because the fabric, it really is quite amazing at wicking away the moisture that's just being extruded from your body as you're running along. So for most of my long distance running, and for the half marathon, I think the second half marathon that I did, and for the full marathon, I wore a compression top, this vest thing, and then I wore this over the top of it just to start off with. So this is a very lightweight, again this one's made by Brooks. You should be able to see there, it's an interesting sort of fabric. It's very, very light. Now you can of course just go out running in a cotton t-shirt, that's absolutely fine. I don't have any problem with that, but you might after a few miles. Running tops, again, it was one of those things I just poo-pooed as just marketing nonsense, but really useful. Strange enough, the running gear, it's brilliant when you're running, but the moment you stop, I mean, I had a run where after about 8 miles I just ground to a halt because my knee started playing up, and suddenly the clothes that I've been wearing that were just brilliant until that moment were horrible, because when you're not actually sweating loads, you just feel all clammy and horrible when you're wearing a close-fitting running top. So yeah, so they are very much just for that job. So finally then, for the clothing, I always go running in a hat. There's nothing special about this hat. I got it in the Australian version of Asda when I was out visiting my brother, and it cost the equivalent of about £2. I've tried things that are labelled as running hats and I didn't find any difference at all. But I find wearing a hat with a peak, it keeps the sun out my eyes, it keeps the rain out my eyes, and it also means that the sweat coming off my forehead has somewhere to go that's not necessarily in my eyes. And I found that wearing a hat with a peak on it, I don't have to wear sunglasses even when it's really sunny. Yeah, and for some reason it just feels better to me to not wear sunglasses when I'm running. Just personal taste, I guess. Although, having said that about the hat keeping the sun out of my eyes, one thing you do want to wear if you go out on a sunny day is obviously sun cream. And if you don't, you'll bitterly regret it, because if you're going out and you're running, say, 10 miles, and 2 miles into your run the sun comes out, by that point you'll have just got into it. You don't want to turn back at that point, but equally if you carry on for the next hour or two, well, if you're anything like me with my skin type, you're just going to end up beetroot. So sun cream is just well worth remembering before you go out. Some of these other things are optional extras that I'll come to later, but one thing that I found really crucial for me starting off was a heart rate watch. Now this isn't the one that I started with, this is quite a fancy one. This one has GPS in it as well, and there's no need to have that facility when you start, or if you're only running locally or whatever. But the initial version that I got was made by the same company, this Sun2, but it was a very basic version, and it was cost, I think, about £30 or £40 brand new, and it comprised of a watch that you obviously wear on your wrist and a chest strap. Now you can get heart rate monitors that you just wear on your wrist and they shine a light through your skin and measure your pulse that way. At the time, so this is a few years ago, at the time they were considered to be a lot less accurate than the chest strap version, which is why I went down that route. I figure if you're going to the effort of taking biometric measurements, they might as well be accurate, so this was my preferred solution. But a lot of people just wear, I think the Apple Watch and things like that can take your pulse as you go along, and if that works for them, that's absolutely fine. But the reason that the heart rate watch was so useful to me was that as I've said in the previous video, always before when I started off, I would go at it too hard, then the recovery would take too long, I wouldn't get any benefit from that session, and I'd soon give up. I'd always had that no pain, no gain mindset, which is true, but only to an extent. What the heart rate watch did for me was it tells you if you're pushing hard enough, and it also tells you if you're pushing too hard, because there's definitely a zone in which you get the maximum amount of benefit. And the thing is, running is hard work. You want to get the maximum benefit for the effort that you're putting in. You really do. So it's not like, say, cycling, where you could go and do something useful with cycling. You could cycle to the shops and back. I've kind of failed at running to the shops and back. I do walk to the shops and back with a rucksack, but I found running with weight didn't work for me. But anyway, on the heart rate watch, even the most basic version, it has zones. So you've got like a zone 1, I mean they're completely arbitrary, the zones, but say zone 1 would be inactive, normal everyday kind of heart rate when you're not really doing any exertion. And then have zone 2, which should be, say, a brisk walk. Zone 3, which should be running at a reasonable pace. And then zone 4 would be overdoing it. That's where you might be trying to run up a hill or something like that. And it's okay to move into that zone briefly, but if you spend a whole running session in the highest zone, you're actually making yourself more unwell than you are going to be gaining from it during the recovery period. During that recovery period, you're going to get back to zero. You're not going to have that super compensation that I mentioned in the previous video. So for me, a heart rate watch was really important to begin with, to tell me when I was in that zone. The thing is, after a while, after a few months of that, you get a feel for it. And then I could go out now, the heart rate watch wouldn't be necessary. What I use it for now is to map my route when I go out running. I mean, it also records my heart rate. It gives me a lot of data. This particular one will, like I say, map the route as I go out. It'll count my steps, my actual cadence as I go, and my heart rate, and the altitude of where I'm running, and all kinds of things like that, which is all nice to have, but definitely not essential. So a heart rate watch, not necessarily a fancy one like that, but a basic heart rate watch of some way of measuring your heart rate, you might find very useful to begin with for that first few months when you've got no way of knowing, you've got no reference point for pushing hard or too hard or not hard enough. You need to know where those lines are, and this seemed to me to be a really quick way of finding out where those lines are. And then once, like I say, once you get the hang of it, once you get the feel for it, the watch isn't so necessary. To sum up this part then, here's what I would consider to be essential stuff for running. I'd say up to a half marathon would be quite manageable just with this kit here. So I'd recommend a hat with a peak, just a cheapie, nothing special at all. I like to have a long sleeve top and a short sleeve top. The 2-in-1 running shorts. Heart rate monitor. Like I say, it doesn't have to be a posh GPS watch like this one. Just a cheap version will do. Or if you've got it built into your Apple Watch or whatever people have nowadays. Some people like to take their phone with them when they're running. I don't. I like to leave my phone behind. But if you do take it with you, it can map out your route, which can be handy as well. And this is just a cheap holster which goes on your arm and contains your phone, and it's got some holes here for headphones as well. Now, I don't personally listen to music when I'm running or anything else. I like to concentrate on my running. But other people do. They find it really useful. And for instance, my mate Mark always listens to a podcast when he goes out running, and he's successfully completed twice as many marathons as I have, so that obviously works for him. And finally, running shoes. So these are my current favourite 2 pairs of running shoes, and I'd suggest 2 pairs is a good idea. It's not essential, but it is a good idea because it gives you the option of running on different surfaces. You can have shoes that are optimised to the different conditions, but more importantly, it stops your feet just settling in to one running pattern, and I think that's really quite important. So it does just change it about a bit, and it means you're not putting in a completely exactly repetitive footstep. That seems to me, I don't really have any evidence for that, but that just seems to me to be a good idea, to just mix it up a little bit. One other thing that many people would consider essential, although I don't personally, is bottled water. Now, I personally don't take water or any other drink on anything less than, say, 10 miles, but that's just a personal preference. Many people do, and that's absolutely fine. So yeah, that may well be in the essential list as well. Right, let's talk technique. So when it comes to running technique, I think it all boils down to efficiency, which might seem like an odd thing to say about something as inherently inefficient as running. But efficiency will get you whatever it is you're trying to get out of running. So if you want to take up running to run fast or to run races, efficiency will get you there. If you want to take up running to get fitter and maybe lose weight, again, efficiency will get you there. Or if you think about it on the flip side, inefficiency is wasted effort, and who's got time for that? But more than just wasted effort, it's also about avoiding injury, for instance, because bad running technique, bad running form will, over time, make injuries much more likely, and we'll get into the reasons of why that is in a moment. When someone starts running and they might go to like a running shop to buy their posh shoes, what they'll do there is put you on a treadmill and make you run on that and watch what you're doing, or they might even video it and show you the footage. The same thing might happen if you join a gym or something like that. Again, the personal trainer might video you on the treadmill and show you that footage. What they're looking for there is to analyze your running gait, and then what usually happens in a shop is that they'll then sell you the shoes to correct that gait. Now, what they're looking for when you go on that treadmill, I'm going to try and demonstrate using these shoes. So if you've not really thought about how you run or walk, you might assume you're just moving like this, like a crank driven by a piston. That would be a regular gait. If you're a neutral gait, is a better way of putting it. So it's stepping straight like that. Now, a lot of people will actually, when they come down and contact the ground when they're running, or even when they're walking, they'll roll their foot like that and outwards. That's pronating. And sometimes, more rarely, they might roll their foot inwards. That's supinating. So what they would do in the shop is sell you some running shoes that offer some support that stops that tendency. So if you pronate like that, it'll have extra bits on the shoe to stop that happening. Now, when I started running, I also joined a gym at the same time, because this was the middle of winter and I thought that would be a good way to get some miles in, as it were, without having to go out in the rain. Now, when you're on a treadmill, obviously it's not like running in the real world where you've got to avoid running into things or getting run over, all that kind of stuff, and work out where you're going, and you have undulating terrain. On a treadmill, you can make it go up a bit or level. That's about it, really. Quicker and slower, I guess. Anyway, the point is that you can watch what you're doing with your feet, which I did. I must have looked a bit odd to the other people there, who were all watching their TVs in front of the treadmills. But there I was, staring at my feet going along, and I realised that I did indeed pronate. But one of my feet pronated much more than the other, so I think it's my right foot. Yes, it is. My right foot tends to kick out more than my left foot. So I thought then, well, even if I get these fancy running shoes that correct that, how's it going to correct one more than the other? And some people would say, well, you can get inserts, you can get special inserts in your shoe which will custom made for you, which will help that. But then I thought, I've learnt to run. So if I've learnt to run in the first place, I can then relearn to run properly. Can I not? I mean, think about it. Some people say, oh, watch children running. They run naturally because blah, blah, blah. They don't. Children don't. They're not taught to run. They're not programmed to run either. I mean, maybe something like a foal or a fawn, or a lamb, they drop out, they give them a quick lick down, off they go. Those animals are born to run. We're not. I mean, you're not going to be able to think that far back, but I guarantee you, you didn't know how to run to begin with. You had to learn it. And I think babies and little children are taught to walk, they're not really taught to run. So whether you end up with a good running gait or not is just luck. So with that in mind, I thought, obviously I've learnt this peculiar running gait. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't good either. I thought I can perhaps, because this is the beginning of getting seriously into running, relearn it. And so that's what I did. And I just taught myself to run in a much more neutral running stance. There is, with all the joints on your body, a sort of ideal movement pattern, a biomechanical ideal. And that's what you want to be doing with running, is it needs to be, your joints need to be working to their optimum, because you'll get away with it for a while. Like any kind of bad habit, you'll get away with it for a while, but the more you do, the more harm potentially you're going to be doing yourself. So it's really important, I think, to take that opportunity at the beginning of taking up serious running to perhaps have a look at the way you're doing it and try and correct it then, because the longer you leave it, the harder it's going to get, like any habit. So that's what I did, and that's what worked for me. So instead of getting support trainers or support running shoes, I think they're called, I just got the standard ones, and like I say, I concentrated very hard on how I ran. And then once I'd done that, I couldn't really go on the treadmill anymore. It's so boring, especially as because my gym membership was off peak, which meant that I would go there in the morning. So on the TVs on the treadmill, the only thing available was like, well, the Jeremy Kyle show or other mid-morning delights, which, yeah, I just couldn't. So there's nothing to do except stare at a blank screen, which is even worse, or is comparably worse, definitely. Anyway, yes, I ended up, I'd rather go running in the rain. One other thing I'll say is that shoes like this is a very minimal, low drop running shoe. It's very good for keeping an eye on the way that you run. The Calderas that I use mainly now, my current favourite shoes, are much more forgiving. They've got much more cushiony sole, and you can, yeah, so I find, what I'm trying to say is I like to run in these quite a bit as well, because they're less forgiving and it just keeps me true, I guess. The other really important part of technique when it comes to your foot hitting the ground is which part of your foot is contacting the ground first. So generally, novices to running, and I was just the same, heel strikes. You come down with your heel and go like that. And I'll show you what that actually looks like. Now this next bit would be a lot easier if I filmed it outside, but then I'd need a camera crew to run after me filming what I'm doing, so we're making do, but I think it'll still work. So you'll come down from your leg being up in the air when you're running along, and you'll land like that, roll like that, and then spring off again for the next stride. That's just often how people run. And it might seem a perfectly reasonable type of running, but if you look at my leg, you can see that my leg is straight. So if you come down and your heel contacts the ground first, there's no energy absorption in here. It's just crash straight on all your joints. The only cushioning you've got is in the heel of the running shoe. There's no natural cushion at all. So the general advice, after a while, you'll start shifting from landing here to somewhere over here. Now, if you move all the way to your toes, that might be fine for sprinting, but I don't think you're going to go very far running on your toes. I certainly wouldn't at my weight. And a lot of people tend to concentrate on landing here, but for myself, I found it about there worked for me. So I come down, and then it's much more springy. So then your leg can bend a bit as you come down, and you're off for the next stride. With that in mind, it should be apparent then that if you've got a high drop shoe like this one, remember this is a 12mm drop, which is I think quite high, you're more likely then to hit with the heel than if you've got a low drop shoe like this. So if you're prone to heel striking and you want to change the way you land, you might want to consider a low drop shoe. And like I said in the previous section, if you're buying the previous year's models, as it were, it's actually cheap enough to experiment a bit, which is what I did. I think I did get a bit carried away, in fairness, but at least I've been through most of the types of shoe and I know what works for me now. So these are just some pointers to help you choose your own running shoes and indeed running gait. Having considered what happens then when your foot hits the ground, it's time to think about your actual stride and number of times that your foot hits the ground per minute, or cadence. And once again, I'm going to suggest not doing what I did when I started out. So after the initial couple of weeks, I think everybody has this, like a couple of weeks of starting some kind of exercise, it's just horrible and your body's constantly going, why are you doing this? Then it gets better, and it really does quite quickly get better. So anyway, after a couple of weeks, there I was running along and I felt fitter and stronger already, and I started opening up my stride and just bounding along. It turns out that's a really bad idea for multiple reasons. Partly because if you're taking great big strides, you're then landing much harder on each stride that you're taking. Obviously that's not a good idea. Also, it's much more tiring to be taking those long strides. So what I learned quite quickly, and I did read about this quite a bit, is to reduce the length of my stride. And it felt really strange at first, but I reduced it right down from great big loping strides to something much more reasonable. That became a more natural way of running. But the thing I really want to share here is that what I found out really worked well for me was that when I go up an incline, I would then shorten my stride even more. So what I'm trying to say is that cadence, that number of steps per minute, I try and keep that fairly constant. And then when I go up a hill or something like that, I then shorten my stride in order to, because I'm slowing down because it's obviously steep, but I'm keeping the same cadence. It's a bit like if you're on a bicycle, you're pedaling away. When you go up a steep hill, you'll drop down the gears. You're trying to pedal at the same sort of speed, but obviously you're going slower, but you're pedaling the same, if that makes sense. So by opening and shortening your length of stride, it's effectively like changing gears on a bicycle or in a car or something like that. So the idea with speeding up your running, once you really get into it, is to take your consistent steps per minute figure, whatever that is, your cadence, and then you raise that up. So you're making those steps quicker for the given, you keep the stride length the same when you're running on the flat, for instance, but you do it faster and hence build up your speed. Now, establishing that number of steps per minute to begin with can be a bit tricky because you've got to settle into a certain rhythm. Now, I have it recorded on my watch. My watch does that for me. But another way of doing it, if you listen to music when you're running, you can download music tracks which have a certain set beats per minute which you can run to. And from what I've read, a lot of people find that really quite useful. Or you can just count your steps and measure it on a watch. It doesn't have to be all that technical. Learning about cadence and the importance of shortening my stride to begin with and then controlling my stride length as I went up inclines, I found personally really useful in my running. And it also means that when I go out and I tackle hills, I can run up the hills. Now, to me, this is the difference between running and jogging, is cadence. So if you have a set cadence which is quite pacey, it's still running in my in my view, my own little world, it's still running even if you're only running at walking pace, which sometimes I am if I'm going up a very steep hill. But nonetheless, to me that's still running, even though my cadence is the same, but my foot stride is shortened until I'm just doing that. And my speed is slowed right down, but I'm still running up those hills. And in time, as you get stronger, you don't need to shorten your stride quite so much going up the hills. hope that bit made sense. It's a slightly tricky thing to get across, and until I took up running I had no idea what any of that meant, and well, why would I really? One other thing that occurs to me that I might as well mention at this point is that often I've found that when I've told people I've taken up running and that I'm running down the roads and things like that, they're very disapproving. They go, oh, you're going to knacker up your joints. But I think maybe 20, 30 years ago, when with the shoe technology of the time back then, yes, they might have a point. Or indeed, as I was running in walking boots, yes, definitely. But I would say not in running shoes. I mean, obviously these are my super lightweight ones, but even so, they have amazing cushioning compared to normal trainers or my walking boots. These ones have even more cushioning in them. So what I'm trying to say is, with a decent pair of running shoes, I don't think you need to fear running on roads or pavements at all. I think it's absolutely fine. And yes, it's going to do you far more benefit than harm. So I have a couple more tips to share on running technique. So we've got the idea then of running in as neutral a style as possible. So with your legs running almost as if they were on pedaling a bicycle. You also want to keep upright. Now this might seem obvious, but as you tire, your shoulders will roll and you'll start to droop like that, and that's the opposite of what you want to happen, because as you tire you need more oxygen, but you're denying yourself the ability to expand your chest if you curl in like that. So the more tired you get, the more important it is to stay as upright as possible. And when you're running uphill, again, you'll tend to lean forwards like that, but again you want to try and be upright, and you'll naturally pitch forward something like that. It's a bit hard to explain without a handy gradient, but if you're running up a hill and you just try and remain upright, you'll soon get the feel of it. And then running downhill, guess what? You want to remain fairly upright. So you don't want to lean too far back when you're going downhill, otherwise again it's your heels are going to be taking a pummeling. Equally, obviously you don't want to lean forward too much or you're going to fall over. So generally speaking, you can't go far wrong by staying upright. And like I say, it's not something you have to think about until you get tired, and then I find it's something you've got to keep in your mind, keep reminding yourself to keep upright, keep breathing, because you're going to need all that oxygen. Now all this stuff in this section about technique might seem like a massive palaver when it's just running as such a simple thing, but I think it is a simple thing, but that doesn't mean that you can't keep improving it. And I come across this concept recently of deliberate practice, and I think that phrase seems new and a bit jargony to me, but I think it's something that I've always tried to do, well, with everything really, is that every time you do it, you're just consciously trying to improve it in some aspect, because nothing's ever 100% optimized. So the more you can do to make it a bit better, the more effective you're going to be, the better at the thing you're going to get, and the better at something you are, the more likely you are to be inspired to keep doing it, surely. Anyway, one of the things that occurred to me was that what do you do with your arms? And if you go and run a race or watch some other people running a race, people do all sorts with their arms. It's quite mad. But I've found actually consciously moving my arms as I run is really good for my balance, and that's particularly important if you're running off-road. And I would say about half of the running that I do is cross-country stuff. So when you're doing that, remember, running is about controlled falling over in effect. You're deliberately coming off balance each step. Now if every time you do that, you're also moving your arms, which, don't forget, weigh a fair amount. So you're using your arms as a counterbalance as you go, you'll suddenly find that your arms settle into a really good rhythm doing that, and you're suddenly much more balanced, which, like I say, is really good when you venture off-road. So for that reason, that's I don't ever carry a water bottle in my hand. I see a lot of people running holding one water bottle, and then to me that would throw me off balance. Obviously that works for them, and that's fine, but for me that wouldn't work at all. Yeah, I have tried it and it didn't. Even if you hold it in one hand and then hold it in the other, it's just, yeah, it doesn't feel right to me. When I run with water, I carry it in my belt, which is something we'll get to in the next section. The last thing I want to say about technique is not something you actually do when you're going along. It's stretching. Now, I've done a couple of races now, and I see a lot of people stretching before a race, but I have read that it's not actually very good for you to stretch cold muscles. So if you do a couple of laps at a car park to warm up first and then do stretching, that's fine, but stretching cold muscles, especially if you've just driven somewhere for a long while, get out of the car and start stretching, probably not a good idea. Now what I do before I go on any kind of run at all is just do a couple of sort of like dynamic stretching is the term, although that's probably a bit that's not really what I'm doing, but it's sort of heading towards that direction. So before I go and actually start running anywhere, I found that I need to do this, and I need to do that, and then get my ankle and put it round. And I wouldn't say this is stretching necessarily, but I do all this sort of stuff a few times, and I found like rotating my arms, all this is really important, because if I don't, if I just head off running, even if I start off slowly and build up, like do a warm up and then into the run, I find that there's some kind of, it builds up in my joints as if they want to click. And so it's, yeah, all this I'm sure is just a consequence of being middle-aged. But nonetheless, for me, I found that's what worked. So some of that, and that. And then I'm good to go. And I think that's all I've got to say about technique, at least for now. Next up then, it's back to equipment, but this time it's optional extras, stuff that I've found really useful, but it's definitely not essential, particularly when you're starting out. Case in point would be these gloves. So these are, I'm pretty sure these are actual running gloves. I say pretty sure because I didn't buy them, I found them. I found them in that Leyland Daft truck that I bought a few years ago. Yes, they were looking somewhere in the recess of that. I pulled them out, cleaned them, and they work great. Now, I don't wear them very often, but on a really cold day, I find these are great. I tend to get cold in my hands and feet, so putting these on just helps for that first mile or two, and then I take them off and stick them in my pocket. So nice, but like I say, not essential. I tend not to go out running at night anymore. I did when I started, and if you're going to go running out at night, you're going to need a head torch, and this is the best head torch I've ever found by a long way. It's really nice. It deserves its own video really. This is a Lenser. I'm not saying you need to get this head torch, I'm just saying I really like this one. This particular model is called an IH5R, and I bought that when it first came out. Bought that with my own money. Lovely head torch, but you do need some kind of head torch if you're going running at night. This simple strap saved my marathon training. This is a IT band strap. Now that terminology probably means nothing to you, and it wouldn't have meant anything to me until I desperately needed one. So the IT band is a tendon that runs down here. It comes from inside here, right deep inside, comes out there, runs down the outside of your leg, and then it inserts around the knee joint and then down to there. It's a massive long piece of tissue. And what happened to me was I was running, as that day that I described before, where I just ground to a halt, and I didn't even walk home, I limped home, and my running clothes that were lovely up to that point. I felt, you know, really at one with my climate. I felt the right temperature. Suddenly I was just a sweaty mess. It was just horrible, and I could only hobble home. It was very odd. But what that turned out to be was that IT band just rubbing against the rest of the knee joint. And so there's lots of reasons for that, and it's generally put down to, again, bad running technique. But in my case, it may have been something to do with that motorbike crash all those years ago. But whatever it was, I needed to fix it, because this was only a month or so before the marathon, and it was pretty stressful, really, because I'd gone from being super fit and running, what was I running at that point, 20 odd miles or so on the long run, to suddenly barely being able to walk. So it was awful. And the usual remedy for that kind of IT band issue is lots and lots of rest, which obviously I couldn't do at that point in my training schedule. So some people have found it's very useful to have something like a tennis ball, and they massage it where the IT band actually inserts up here, to try and lengthen that bit. Other people use a foam roller to roll up and down there, and they find that really useful. But what I found really useful was this. So if you have IT band issues, you'll have to research it for yourself and find out what works for you. But this worked for me. This little patch here, this pad, put it around your leg. It's fairly stretchy. It's just neoprene and some Velcro. It couldn't be much simpler. But that pad there pushes down on the IT band, and it just stops it moving in that direction, there and there. Such a simple thing worked like magic. And I know some people will say, well, that must be a placebo effect, but I'm not going to debate it. I'm just going to say it saved my marathon training. This is the watch that I've mentioned previously. This is a really lovely watch, actually. I was very happy with this. This is a Sunto Ambit 3 Peak, I think is its full name. It's a lovely watch, really nicely made, really beautifully engineered. It does GPS and the Russian version of GPS. It's very accurate with its mapping. You can download maps into it, so it can navigate you when you run, or it can just keep a track of where you're going, and then you can upload that, which is something I'll get into in the next section. And it keeps lots of data about you as well, like your heart rate and cadence and things like that. So it's a lovely watch, but I can't recommend it because the company that makes it has completely screwed up their website. They've taken away the website that used to record all the data and replaced it with an app which doesn't work properly. So that was a fairly terrible move. Yeah, so when this watch stops working, I'll have to move to a different company. So that's unfortunate, but there we go. But a GPS watch, again, so what I'm trying to say, GPS watch, it's not essential. It is very nice if you're wanting to make a record of your runs, but you could do it just by strapping your mobile phone onto your arm and setting the location on that. It will do the same thing. All smartphones can do GPS these days. Instead of strapping your phone to your arm, you could put it in a belt like this. And this is a really handy belt. It cost me a tenner, I think it was. It's just, it's a nice balance, this belt, between being useful, it's big enough to actually hold some stuff, but small enough that it doesn't get in the way. When you're running long distance, I think people tend to attach, blokes particularly, tend to attach an awful lot of stuff to themselves, which is probably not necessary. This belt here, it's just got one pocket that you can just about fit your phone in, and then it's got these little holsters here for putting water bottles. Now, it did come with a couple of water bottles, but they were piddly. They were about that big. Waste of time. What I found worked perfectly in here is the Fanta bottle, because the Fanta bottle has got that sort of wasp waste to it, and don't whatever you do go running with the Fanta in there. I did that one time, and of course when I tried to take a drink I ended up wearing rather a lot of Fanta, because obviously I'd been running for about half an hour by that point. Anyway, fill it up with water, or put one of these tablets in, which we'll come to in a moment, and then the Fanta bottle sits in there perfectly, and I could carry one Fanta bottle's worth or two. And I found that was 2 bottles was perfect for me for running up to marathon length in my training. So yeah, I didn't need to carry any more water than that, I found. So a nice little belt, and obviously I don't carry a phone when I go running, so I could use that pocket there and fill it full of gels, which is something we'll come to as well. So this little box here has got all the, well, nutrition, I suppose it is. So we'll go on to those gels then. So all these ones in these squidgy packets here, these are all gels. And this box, by the way, I found in Lidl's. It was just in their aisle of offers. I can't remember how much I paid. It was quite reasonable. It was reasonable enough that I bought 2 boxes, put it that way, which is more gels than I'll probably ever get through. So gels are just a sort of goo that you just pull the top off and you squirt it in your mouth, and it's full of sugar, but the kind of sugar that you can absorb into your bloodstream and keep you going. They're actually there's a lot of science in the gels, is what I'm trying to get to. And they'll also have the electrolytes that you need, and the sort of thing that you'll be sweating out as you go along. They tend to be in here as well. And then some of the gels, like this one, has caffeine in it, which I like to keep in reserve in case I'm flagging towards the end of a run or the last mile or 2 of a race, something like that. I'll squirt down the caffeine one, off I go for one last burst. I did have, when I did the marathon, I always like to carry 1 double espresso gel for emergency purposes, and that got used on the marathon in the last mile or so, got me over the line. But generally I prefer to have the ones without caffeine, and I would take a gel every 5 miles or so on a long run. Everybody has different needs for this sort of thing. Some people don't have gels at all. You don't need to. Some people really find them quite horrible as well. I don't mind them too much. I imagine if I had enough, they'd be a bit grim. I mean, it is just a goo after all. So yes, gels I found quite useful. I wouldn't use them now because generally I'm going out now to increase my fitness, but also to burn fat. So to me, consuming more calories as I go isn't really going to help. I'm now at the point I can run. I've been running quite a bit this year so far, and I can now go out and I can run 10 miles without too much fuss. So that's good enough for me at this point in my life. So for me personally, right now, I would probably just take a gel as like an emergency backup. They don't really weigh anything, so I could stick one in. I've got a pocket in my running top or a pocket in my shorts, and if I was doing a long run, I'd probably take one just in case I start flagging somewhere towards the end. But I wouldn't take gels as a matter of course unless I was actually training for something. Also in this box when I got it, you've got some of these little chewy bars. They're kind of like chewy flapjack things, and these are great for just before a race if you actually get into doing half marathons and things like that. I found this instead of breakfast, I'd have one of these. So it's like I said, like a gooey flapjack. This particular one's full of caffeine, so I knock that down with a mug or 2 of strong coffee, and that would sort me out for starting the race. Obviously timing's everything with that kind of stuff. So most of this box is just different types of different flavours of these gel things basically. And then you've got this. This is electrolyte tablets. So these are effervescent tablets, like the Alka-Seltzer sort of tablets. Don't stick that in your mouth, you'll start frothing. This is great to put in a bottle of water, I found. Stick it in a bottle of water, stick it in the belt, or whatever it is you're using. and this will replace some of the stuff that you're sweating out as you go along. The other thing, some people, myself included, just seem to pump out loads of salt when they sweat, and I can tell that by my hat going all, you can see the lines of salt in it when it dries out. Anyway, for that reason I take these salt tablets, and these are just like, they taste just like refreshers, if you remember those. I think that's important for cramping. I say I think because I've never had cramping, perhaps because I've always taken salt tablets or the electrolyte drink. But yes, I'm pretty sure I've read that there is a correlation between the lack of sodium in your body and cramping. Pretty sure, but again, as with everything, do your own research. And one last piece of kit. This is a foam roller, and you put it on the ground, you lie on it, whichever part of you want to massage, and then you just roll around a bit. Now, I'm including this because many people I've read about, many people saying how useful these are for stopping their muscles being sore after running. I didn't find it useful for that at all. I have found a use for it, and I use it for stretching my upper back muscles, which has got nothing to do with running. But yeah, like I say, for running it wasn't any use to me at all, but a lot of people have said it's very useful to them, so I thought I'd mention that. They're very cheap as well, so you can always just get one and see if it works for you. I think that's it then for the extra kit. Let's have a look then at advanced training methods. I'll finish up then with a look at kind of advanced training techniques, sort of thing that only really matters if you're training for a race or something like that, or trying to push yourself to do a particularly long distance. So I've mentioned a couple of times now about recording your run, be it with the mobile phone attached to your arm or in a belt or with a GPS watch like this. Obviously you've got to put that data somewhere to make it useful, and if it's recorded on a watch, the watch manufacturer will have a website. It might be perfectly adequate for your needs, or you can upload it to one of the fitness sites, and the one I use, and probably the most popular at the moment, is Strava. So I'll show you, I'll go and get the laptop in a minute and show you one of my runs on the Strava website and how it breaks down all that information. So I've gone and got my laptop and I've loaded up one of my runs here, and I can show you what the Strava website looks like. So this is what Strava will show you. It gives you the basic details up here, the distance, so nearly 10 miles there, the time and the pace, and then the calories burnt, which is an estimation. This is all data from my watch. Then as I scroll down we get to the more interesting stuff. This then is a map of the run that I did. So you can see it's a circular route, and I finished along the seafront here. It was quite memorable actually. It was lashing down with rain on the last bit, and I ran through the surf, getting wet from above and below. But this is the more interesting stuff. So this is the biometric data and the terrain data that the watch can provide. So you've seen up there the GPS is mapping out the route itself. My watch has a altimeter built into it as well, so it can tell you the altitude that I'm running at, which is this shaded part here. And you can see there I'm going up and down some hills. This is around Penzance in Cornwall. I'm going up and down some pretty steep hills, and then I finished the run, like I say, running along the seafront, which is obviously pretty flat there. So it's currently showing my pace, which isn't particularly useful, I don't think. But if I put the heart rate on, now this is, especially when starting out running, this is really what I was looking for, was the heart rate data. So you can see here it's bobbing up and down as you'd expect. Then when I go up this really steep hill, there's a corresponding leap in my heart rate, again as you'd expect. But what's a sign to me, a sign of fitness, is as I crest it here, as I crest the hill, my heart rate comes down quite rapidly. And again here when I got this hill, heart rate peaks and then it's bosh, straight back down again. And I think that is a really good sign of fitness, is that heart rate recovery. So I'll turn that one off, and then let's have a look at cadence. So you can see here my cadence is around about 161 steps per minute is the average. But you can see there, that's a nice consistent, if we ignore the we might call the outliers here, which is mostly, this is probably where I'm stopping to cross a road and things like that, that's why it drops down. But generally overall there's a nice steady, you could draw a nice line through that, well, which is what the average is, and it stays consistent, going up hills, down hills, and it stays pretty consistent over the course of the run. It's slow, it is going downhill very slightly, but it's pretty consistent still. So that's the point I was trying to get across about cadence. And I think that's a really good thing to bear in mind as you're running. So we've got heart rate, cadence, and pace. So those are the things that my watch can bring up. You can get the map drawn for you just by running with a phone. Like I say, all phones have GPS these days, so that will draw out that, and that in itself is a nice record to have, because that'll be able to tell you your pace and speed as you're going, particularly if you run the same route on occasion. So that's most of what Strava does. Yes, I can't tell you what the paid for version of it does because I don't pay for it, but presumably it's a bit more. Seeing the mention of pace on there, that has reminded me actually of something else that I want to mention that only really is important when you're running a race. When you come to look at running plans, if you're going to work up towards a race, a running plan's a really good idea, and I'll touch on those in a moment. In your running plan, it will have the kind of pace that you want to get to, and then sort of increase each week. Now, the reason this is so important when you come to a race is that when you set out for a race, everybody goes off like the clappers. It's very hard to avoid doing that, to run off with everybody else. And even so, in my first race, I knew what pace I wanted to run at that would get me round a half marathon at the time that I felt was respectable. and yet, even so, when the race starts, everybody thunders off. It's really hard not to run off with the pack. But if you can do that, if you can maintain the pace that you've set yourself in training, quite soon you'll be overtaking that pack. As all those people that rushed off together start flagging, you'll be overtaking them, running at the pace that you've set. So running plans have got not only a pace to run to, but also a progression. And these again are all things that the watch makes very easy to work out. If you have a race in mind, if you've booked yourself in for a half marathon or indeed a full marathon or even just a 5 or 10k, whatever it is, it's really useful to have a plan to get there. Websites like Runner's World and places like that offer completely free training programs that you can download, and then what I did was just tweak them slightly to suit my own circumstances. But it's really nice to have I found it really nice anyway, to have a sort of a set schedule to work to, and then you know if you're progressing well enough towards getting towards the distances that you need to do to actually run the race. And it gives a lot of confidence, I find, as well, to be able to turn up at the race line knowing you've put in all that work. The race itself then becomes an enjoyable event, which of course is what it's supposed to be after all. I really do believe if it's not fun, then you're doing it wrong. So in that training program, they'll have different types of run. Generally what people do is at the weekend, either Saturday or usually on a Sunday, they'll do the long run, and that's also what I did as well. So that's a long run at a slower pace than you would aim to do for the actual race. It's all about getting the miles in, getting yourself an aerobic base is what they say. That's what you're building, an aerobic base. So you're just building up each week or each couple of weeks, you add a bit more to the distance of that long run until you're regularly getting to the distance that you want. So for me nowadays, it would be about 10 miles. But obviously when I was training for a half marathon, it would be pushing up to 13 miles and so on. So that's a long run. But you also want to do things like, during the week, it's good to go out and do a short, snappy run. So I put on my lightweight running shoes and I just go out for a quick blast. Just do a 3 miles, 4 miles, something like that. And that gets you some speed. So it's not just about doing that long run. You also want to pick up the pace a bit as well, get yourself used to running fast on occasion. So that's a tempo run, that would be called. A lot of people would join running clubs, and at a running club they would go and do like interval training and things like that. Now it just doesn't appeal to me very much. Again, just a personal choice. What I did for that kind of training was just plot a route. So during the week I'd plot a route not as long as my long run, but longer than my tempo run, and I'd make sure it involved lots of hills, which round here is quite easy to do. So I'd just make sure that there was a lot of going down and then more importantly a lot of going upness, and that then makes you stronger. So then that's, if you're doing 3 runs a week, 1 is for speed, 1 is for strength, and then 1 is for stamina. So you can see it mixes it up, it makes it much more interesting, going and doing a variety of runs. Obviously you can sit down and pick your route out as well to go, and that's something I actually quite enjoyed doing, the anticipation. And it's all part of the process, just building up a route, and I got to see so much of the countryside around here that I'd just not seen before, despite having lived here for so long. So I've touched on injury before, and the only real setback I had was that IT band issue, which thankfully I was able to resolve before the marathon, and it didn't really hold me up too much. But I think definitely with injury prevention is everything. I always go out for a run thinking about the next run in effect, because I always say the most important thing about going for a run is being able to do the next one. So that means not pushing too hard, not falling down rabbit holes, not getting run over, none of these things. Just making sure when you've got back safely, you can go out again. That's the only way you'll progress, is by consistency. And of course you can't consistently go running if you've injured yourself, so just avoid getting injured. Avoid overdoing it, which is the same thing as getting injured. The exception is, of course, a race. So when it comes to race day, just go for it. And it's very liberating to do so as well. At a certain point during that marathon, I'd been holding back somewhat because it was a very long way, certainly felt like a very long way. At a certain point I realised that I was going to make it. I was going to make it in time as well, because if you don't get past certain checkpoints at a certain time, they take you off the race. I went past the last checkpoint in good time, and I suddenly thought, I'm going to make it. And then I just went for it. I just went, go for broke. I thought to myself, this is my one and only marathon running experience. And I ran the rest of it. And that was, like I say, that very liberating feeling to do that. And yeah, I hope if you're going for a race, you will experience that too. One other absolute classic tip for races is that on race day, don't do anything novel, don't do anything unusual. The amount of people on race day that have a different type of breakfast to what they normally have, or something like that, or they have an extra 2 cups of coffee or something like that. Anything that you haven't already completely trialed is out of the question on race day, because chances are you're probably going to regret it. Those extra 2 mugs of coffee are going to mean a toilet break halfway through the race. or worse. So yes, be careful of that, particularly if you then on the race day you take a load of, say, gels that you've never tried before. Those particular gels you might not get on with at all, and race day is not the time you want to be finding that out. And so yeah, keep to your plan for a race and don't try anything novel. And I say that even though on race day itself you will be somewhat panicky, but that is completely normal. Just stick to your plan and all will be well. And with that, I think I've shared everything I can think of to do with running. So I've got the feeling it's going to be an extraordinarily long video that only several people have watched. But if you have, well, thanks for watching so long, and yeah, if I could give you some kind of endurance medal, I would. So that's it for running. I'm going to tackle strength training next, hopefully in a more condensed format. See you then. Cheers.